The old house creaked under the weight of the wind, its wooden beams groaning like tired bones. Elara Winterbourne sat by the hearth, her gnarled fingers tracing the worn spine of a leather-bound journal. The firelight painted shadows across the knots in the wooden floor, shadows that moved like memories she couldn't outrun. 78 years of living, and still, her chest tightened every time she thought of Marianne Hartwell. Even the name tasted bitter on her tongue. Outside, the village buzzed with preparations for the harvest festival, lanterns strung between the crooked rooftops, laughter threading through the mist. It had been 3 days since Elara overheard the butcher's wife chattering in the square, "Marianne's coming back." After 40 years, Elara closed her eyes. She could still see Marianne's face, young and bright before the betrayal. Before she'd whispered Elara's secret to the entire village, the child she'd carried, the love she'd lost. One careless confession, and Elara's family had turned their backs, the neighbors' kindness shriveling into suspicion. No one believed her when she swore the child was born from love, not sin. Marianne had known that, known the consequences, and she told them anyway. Now the festival would bring Marianne home, Marianne Hartwell, widow of a merchant, draped in silks and generosity. The village adored her. Elara's fingernails dug into her palms. She reached for the cloth bundle tucked beneath her chair and unfolded it with slow purpose. Inside lay a necklace, an old, tarnished thing, the pendant shaped like a teardrop. Marianne had given it to her when they were girls, swearing it would protect her. A lie like everything else. Elara tied it around her neck. Let Marianne see it. Let her remember. The knock at the door startled her. Old man Tolliver stood on the porch, his cap in his hands, the damp settling into his wool coat. "Elara," he said, his voice gravelly. "They're needing extra hands at the square, setting up tables, hanging garlands, thought you might." "I'm not going," she cut in. He sighed, shifting his weight. "It's been 40 years, ain't no use holding grudges." A hot ember popped in the hearth. Elara's jaw clenched, easy for him to say. His life hadn't been picked apart by whispers. She forced a tight smile. "Tell them I'm ill." He hesitated, then nodded and shuffled back into the dusk. When the door shut, Elara turned to the cracked mirror above her wash basin. The woman staring back had silver hair, thin as cobwebs, and eyes that had long lost their warmth. But beneath the wrinkles, the anger still burned. She whispered to her reflection, "You waited this long. You can wait 3 more days." Night settled deep into the valley. The village lights blurred through the mist, laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Elara slipped into her bed, the necklace cold against her skin. Her dreams were restless, filled with Marianne's laughter, young, cruel, echoing like church bells. Dawn came slow and gray. The next 3 days crawled. Elara kept to her routines, sweeping the dusty floors, boiling weak tea, tending the stubborn rosemary bush out back. But her mind was elsewhere, spinning threads of a plan. She wouldn't scream. She wouldn't beg for apologies. No, she'd make Marianne see. On the eve of the festival, the village square glittered under strands of golden lights. Elara watched from her window, fingering the pendant at her throat. Tomorrow, Marianne would stand before them all, honored, adored. And Elara, she'd be ready. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the yellowed letter tucked inside her journal, the last words her father had written before he turned her out. "You bring shame on this family." She tucked it into her sleeve. "Not just me," she thought grimly. Marianne helped. The wind picked up, rattling the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a fiddle started playing. Elara blew out the candle and let the darkness swallow her. Tomorrow would come soon enough. The morning of the festival dawned with an eerie quiet, the kind that seemed to hold its breath. Elara was awake before the sun had fully risen, her bones protesting as she dressed in the dim light. She chose her best shawl, the indigo one with the frayed edges, and tightened it around her shoulders. It wouldn't do to look like a beggar today, not when she had to stand before them all. She moved through the house slowly, her hands skimming the worn furniture like she was saying goodbye. The kettle hissed on the stove, and she poured herself a cup, the steam curling around her face. The tea tasted bitter, but she drank it anyway. The bitterness suited her. The pendant still hung heavy around her neck. She touched it once, then slipped her father's letter from the nightstand into her pocket. Outside, the village had begun to stir. The distant sound of voices, the clatter of carts, the faint scent of roasting meat. Elara took a deep breath. It was time. The walk to the square felt longer than it ever had before. The mist clung low to the ground, parting reluctantly as she walked. The villagers she passed barely glanced her way, their attention fixed on the festivities. She was invisible. Again. The square was a riot of color, ribbons streaming from the eaves of the market stalls, children darting between legs, the air thick with the smell of honey cakes and spiced cider. Elara lingered at the edge of it all, watching. And then she saw her. Marianne Hartwell stood near the platform where the speeches would be held, wearing a dress of deep green, her silver hair pinned in elegant waves. She was laughing, a hand resting lightly on a merchant's arm, her voice carrying the same warm lilt it always had. Elara's chest clenched. She hadn't expected the sight of her to hurt so much. And yet the hurt sharpened into something else the moment Marianne turned and their eyes met across the crowd. A flicker of surprise, discomfort, then recognition. Marianne's expression faltered. Elara didn't look away. A passing villager jostled her, snapping the moment. By the time she steadied herself, Marianne was gone, swept away into the throng. The festival carried on, oblivious. Baskets of bread were handed out, fiddlers played, children shrieked with delight. Elara stood motionless, her fingers tightening around the edges of her shawl. Then the mayor climbed onto the platform, clapping his hands for attention. "Friends," he called, "we are here today not just to celebrate the harvest, but to honor one of our own, a woman whose generosity has blessed this village for decades." Elara's stomach twisted. "Please, welcome back to our little corner of the world, our dear Marianne Hartwell." The applause was deafening. Marianne stepped onto the platform, smiling, waving, every bit the beloved figure. Elara's pulse roared in her ears. This was it. She pushed forward, her footsteps steady even as her breath came short. The crowd shifted, some glancing at her with confusion, others with annoyance at being moved aside. She didn't stop. Not until she stood at the base of the platform, looking up at Marianne. The older woman's smile froze. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, heavy as the pendant around Elara's neck. Then Marianne spoke, her voice low. "Elara." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Some of the older villagers knew the name, remembered the scandal. Others simply stared. Elara didn't care. She drew out the letter, her fingers trembling only slightly. "Do you remember this?" Marianne's gaze dropped to the paper. "What is?" "My father's words." Elara cut in, her voice carrying now, clear and sharp. "The ones he wrote before he called me a disgrace and turned me out. Before the village decided I was unworthy of kindness." The crowd stirred uncomfortably. Marianne's face had gone pale. "You know what I find funny?" Elara continued, bitterness creeping in. "I was forgiven for nothing, but you were forgiven for everything." Marianne's lips parted, but no sound came. Elara laughed, a dry, hollow thing. "You told my secret with a half apology on your tongue, didn't you? Oh, I didn't mean for this to happen. I only wanted to help." She took a step forward. "Did you help when my father barred the door, when the others stopped speaking to me, when I had to scrape by on scraps for years?" Someone shouted from the crowd, "That's enough." But Elara wasn't done. She tugged the pendant from her neck, holding it up. "You gave me this when we were 15, said it was protection, but the only thing it protected me from was the truth, that you would break a promise the moment it suited you." Marianne's hands clenched at her sides. "Elara, I never—" "Don't," Elara snapped. "Don't lie to me again, not here." The mayor stepped forward, his face red. "This is a festival, not a stage for old grievances." Elara turned to the crowd, ignoring him. "She swore she wouldn't tell a soul about my child, the one I loved, the one who was taken from me because of her." Gasps, whispers. Marianne's eyes flickered to the people around them, then back to Elara. For the first time in 40 years, something like shame crossed her face, but it was too late. Elara lowered the pendant, letting the chain dangle between her fingers. Then she dropped it onto the wooden platform with a soft clink. The sound was small, final. Silence settled over the square. Marianne stared at the necklace as if it were a ghost. Elara exhaled, the weight in her chest easing. She had waited decades for this moment, had imagined it 1,000 times, the shouting, the accusations, the satisfaction of watching Marianne squirm. But now, standing here, she felt nothing. Nothing but the quiet realization that the anger had run its course. She turned away, and then Marianne's voice cracked behind her. I never meant for you to lose everything." Elara stopped. The words hung there, heavy and raw. She looked back. Marianne stood with her arms wrapped around herself, not proud, not defiant, just human. Elara swallowed hard. Then, without another word, she walked away, the crowd parting before her. The wind picked up as she reached the edge of the square, carrying with it the scent of rain. She pulled her shawl tighter and kept walking. She didn't look back. Elara walked until the noise of the festival faded behind her, until the only sounds were her own footsteps on the damp earth and the rustle of leaves overhead. The mist clung to the trees as evening settled in, turning the world soft and blurred at the edges. She didn't know where she was going. Forward, away. That was enough. The path dipped down toward the old stone bridge, the one that crossed the creek where she and Marianne had once skipped stones as girls. Elara paused, resting her hands on the cool, moss-covered railing. The water below moved slow and dark, carrying fallen leaves like tiny, aimless boats. It should have felt like victory. She had said what she needed to say. The truth was out now, written plainly on Marianne's face in the hushed whispers of the villagers. So why did her chest ache like this? A gust of wind made her shiver. She tightened the shawl around her shoulders, old, worn, same as the rest of her. "You always did hate the cold," came a voice behind her. Elara didn't turn. She didn't need to. After all these years, she still knew that voice like her own breath. Marianne stepped up beside her, her fine festival dress catching the fading light. She didn't look at Elara, just stared down at the water like she was searching for something lost. "You followed me," Elara said flatly. "I did." Silence stretched between them, thin as the mist. Elara exhaled. "You should go back. The mayor will be looking for his honored guest." Marianne's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. Let him look. A leaf floated past beneath them, a fragile, browning thing. Marianne sighed. "You were right about all of it." Elara's hands tightened on the railing. She had rehearsed this moment in her head 1,000 times, had imagined tearing into Marianne with fresh words, fresh fury. But now here all she had was exhaustion. "Rightness doesn't fix anything," she muttered. "No," Marianne agreed softly. "It doesn't." She turned then, facing Elara fully for the first time since the square. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression stripped bare of all its polished charm. "I should have come to you sooner. I should have begged your forgiveness years ago." Elara laughed short, sharp, no humor in it. Would it have changed anything? Marianne hesitated, then shook her head. Probably not. The wind picked up again, sending dry leaves skittering across the bridge. Somewhere in the trees, a bird called, high and mournful. Elara looked down at her hands, rough from years of work, from hardship Marianne had never known. "You had everything," she said quietly. "Family, money, respect, and her voice caught. Marianne swallowed hard. "I know." Elara closed her eyes. "Do you?" For a long moment, there was no answer. Then Marianne reached into the folds of her skirt and pulled out something small, the pendant Elara had thrown at her feet. The one she'd given her all those years ago. "I never got rid of it," Marianne said, holding it out. "Couldn't bring myself to." Elara stared at the silver glint in Marianne's palm, at the delicate engraving she'd once traced with wondering fingers. Protection, Marianne had called it, a liar's gift. "It doesn't matter now," Elara said. "It does to me." Marianne's voice cracked. "Even if you never forgive me, even if you walk away and never speak to me again, I wanted you to know that." Elara didn't take the pendant, but she didn't walk away either. The last of the daylight slipped behind the trees, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. Somewhere in the distance, the festival music played on, bright and oblivious. Marianne's fingers curled around the pendant again. "Your father died last winter," she said suddenly, voice quiet. Elara went very still. "I thought you should know," Marianne continued. "He never remarried, never spoke of you, not once in all those years." Elara let out a slow breath, half grief, half something bitter and resigned. "Did he ever regret it?" "I don't know," Marianne admitted, then softer, "but I think he must have." A single tear slid down Elara's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. Marianne stepped closer, hesitant, like she was afraid Elara might vanish if she moved too fast. "I can't undo what I did, but if there's anything at all, that I can do now." Elara looked at her, really looked. At the lines around Marianne's eyes she didn't remember, at the gray streaking her once dark hair. Time had aged them both. Time and guilt and loss. She thought of the letter in her pocket, the words her father had written, harsh, final, branding her a disgrace. Thought of the child she'd loved and lost, the life she'd been forced to build alone. Revenge hadn't filled the hollow places inside her. That was the cruelest joke of all. The pendant glinted in Marianne's palm. Half a lifetime ago, they'd been girls whispering secrets in the dark. Elara turned her face toward the gathering night. "Tell me one thing," she said. "Just one." Marianne nodded. "Did you ever think of me in all those years?" Marianne didn't hesitate. Every day. The truth of it sat between them, not forgiveness, not absolution, but something quieter, a shared wound that had never quite healed right. Elara reached out, took the pendant. Marianne let out a shuddering breath. Far off, the first drops of rain began to fall. The rain came down harder now, fat drops splashing against Elara's weathered cheeks, mingling with the tear she hadn't wiped away. The pendant was cold in her palm, heavier than she remembered. Marianne stood shivering in her fine festival shawl, the elaborate embroidery going dark with moisture. Neither moved towards shelter. "I kept the letters," Marianne said suddenly. "The ones you sent after everything. I read them until the paper wore thin." There was a tremor in her voice, like the old floorboards in Elara's house creaking underfoot. Elara's fingers tightened around the pendant. She remembered those letters, pleading, furious, raw with hurt. "You never answered." Marianne flinched. "I was a coward." The admission hung between them, bare and ugly. "By the time I found my spine, your father had made sure no letter of mine could reach you." A gust of wind sent the trees shuddering. Marianne's fine shawl flapped like a trapped bird. Elara exhaled hard through her nose. "You could have tried harder." "You're right." Marianne's hands knotted in the wet fabric. "I should have ridden to that god-forsaken mill town myself. Should have thrown rocks at your window until you let me explain." Elara nearly laughed. Nearly. The image was absurd. Prim Marianne Hawthorne skulking in an alley, pelting shabby tenement windows with pebbles like a lovesick stable boy. But the laugh caught in her throat when she glimpsed Marianne's expression. The woman meant it. Lightning flickered in the distance. The festival music had stopped, replaced by the muffled shouts of villagers herding children indoors. The storm would be on them soon. Elara tucked the pendant into her pocket. "You didn't come here to return trinkets," she said. "Why now after 50 years? Marianne hesitated. Rain dripped from her chin. "The doctor says I've got 6 months, maybe 8. A jagged silence. The words settled like stones in Elara's gut. She searched Marianne's face, the pallor beneath her rouge, the slight tremor in her shoulders. Not just cold, then. Ill. "Lung rot," Marianne added, almost conversational. "Started last winter. Fitting, I suppose. That's when I heard they'd finally torn down your old house by the mill." She reached abruptly for Elara's hand. Her fingers were warm despite the rain. "I had to see you before." Elara jerked back. "Don't." Marianne's arm fell limp at her side. "I deserve that." They stood there, 2 old women in a downpour, the past stretching between them like a frayed rope. Elara's thoughts churned. All those years planning revenge, sharpening her bitterness like a knife. And now this, an apology, a dying plea. The first thunderclap boomed overhead. Marianne startled, then straightened her spine with visible effort. "Come home with me," she said suddenly. "Just for tonight. You'll catch your death out here." Elara snorted. "Your fine friends would faint at the sight of me dripping on their rugs." "They're not my friends." Marianne's mouth twisted. "Just vultures waiting for the reading of the will." She stepped closer, rain plastering her gray curls to her forehead. "Please, Lara, one night. That's all I'm asking." Elara hadn't heard that name in decades. Lara, not Elara, what Marianne had called her when they were girls stealing apples from the vicar's orchard. Her chest ached. Thunder rolled again. The storm was right overhead now. Somewhere in the village, a shutter banged loose in the wind. Elara swiped rain from her eyes. "You've got a fire going at that grand house of yours." Marianne's breath hitched. "A big one, and brandy." Elara adjusted her shawl. "Lead the way, then. But I'm not promising conversation." Marianne's smile flickered like candlelight. "Wouldn't dream of it." They walked side by side through the lashing rain, not touching, not speaking. The pendant burned a hole in Elara's pocket. 50 years ago, she'd have given her right arm to step inside Marianne's fine house. Now she just felt tired. The road turned to mud beneath their feet. Marianne's linen slippers were ruined within minutes, but she didn't complain. Elara snuck a glance at her profile. The stubborn set of her jaw, the way her breath came just a shade too quick. Dying. The word echoed in Elara's skull, mingling with the drumbeat of rain. All her grand plans crumbling to ash. What was revenge against the ticking of a clock? They reached the hawthorn gate. The ironwork loomed ornate and dripping, the house beyond it a hulking shadow with golden windows. Marianne fumbled with the latch, her swollen knuckles uncooperative. Without thinking, Elara reached over and popped it open. Their hands brushed. Marianne's fingers were icy. "Thank you," Marianne whispered. Elara said nothing. But as they trudged up the gravel drive, she didn't pull away when Marianne's shoulder bumped against hers in the dark. The front door swung open before they reached it. A harried-looking housemaid gasped at the sight of them. "Madam, we were about to send." "Fetch towels and dry clothes," Marianne ordered, stepping inside. "And tell cook to heat broth." The maid's eyes darted to Elara's damp, threadbare shawl. "For both of you." Marianne's voice turned to steel. "Is there an echo in this house?" The maid fled. Elara stood dripping on the marble floor, suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look, a weathered old crow in a mansion's foyer. The air smelled of beeswax and lavender. No mold, no damp, no sour tang of poverty. Marianne shrugged off her ruined shawl. Her festival dress clung to her, the expensive fabric darkened by rain. She caught Elara staring and managed a shaky grin. "You always did say I'd look better in rags." A startled laugh escaped Elara, still vain as ever. Some things never change. For the first time in 50 years, they smiled at each other, just for a heartbeat. Then Marianne swayed dangerously. Elara caught her elbow without thinking. "Easy there." Marianne's pulse thrummed rabbit-quick under her fingers. Up close, Elara could see the feverish sheen in her eyes, the effort it took to stay upright. "Stairs," Marianne panted. "Been giving me trouble lately." Elara eyed the grand staircase, a ridiculous thing, all sweeping curves and polished banisters. "You'd think with all this money you'd have installed a dumbwaiter for your brittle old bones." That got a weak chuckle. "Next time." The maid returned with an armload of towels. Between them, they got Marianne dried off and bundled into a sitting-room chair by the fire. The dry clothes turned out to be one of Marianne's nightgowns and a woolen robe, both comically oversized on Elara's wiry frame. "Like dressing a cornstalk in a sail," Marianne muttered as Elara rolled up the sleeves. "Still sharper with insults than compliments, I see." Marianne's smile faltered as another cough racked her. Elara pressed a mug of broth into her hands and didn't comment on how they trembled. The fire crackled. The storm howled outside. Elara gazed around the opulent room, the oil portraits, the porcelain knickknacks, the embroidered cushions, everything meticulously arranged, everything lifeless. "Quite a tomb you've built," she said quietly. Marianne followed her gaze. "Isn't it just?" She took a careful sip of broth. "Thomas died 15 years ago. The children visit twice a year. Once in spring to remind me of their inheritance, once in winter to make sure I haven't changed the will." Elara studied her own reflection in the polished side table. No grandchildren to spoil. 3. Marianne set down her mug. "They call me grandmama and curtsy like I'm the queen. Can't stand the sight of me." Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed midnight. Elara picked at a loose thread on the robe. "You were right, you know, about the mill house. They bulldozed it last November." Marianne stared into the fire. "I'm sorry. Don't be, it was a rat's nest." Elara hesitated. "I moved back to the village last year, little cottage by the old blacksmith's." Marianne's head snapped up. All this time, had to see if the gossip was true, if you really were the saint everyone claimed. The silence stretched. A log collapsed in the hearth, sending up a shower of sparks. Marianne reached for her hand. And Elara let her take it. Their fingers were both knotted with age, but the way Marianne's thumb brushed her knuckle, that hadn't changed. "You're no saint," Elara whispered. Marianne squeezed her hand. "Never wanted to be." Outside, the storm raged on, but in that quiet room, for the first time in half a century, something between them began, slowly, painfully, to mend. The fire had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows across the sitting-room walls. Marianne's shallow breathing had evened out at last, her head nodding against the high-backed chair. Elara watched the rise and fall of the robe draped over her chest, struck by how fragile she seemed under all that wealth, like a china doll wrapped in too much velvet. She rose carefully, her knees protesting after so many hours still, and crossed to the window. The storm had eased, leaving behind a world of dripping eaves and muffled silence. The garden below was a mess of broken branches and scattered petals, the moonlight turning the puddles into sheets of silver. 50 years ago, that garden had been nothing but wild grass and mud. Now it was trimmed and terraced, every bush sculpted into something elegant and unnatural, just like the woman sleeping by the fire. The door creaked open behind her, and the maid slipped in carrying a tray with fresh tea. "She's asleep," Elara whispered. The maid, Agnes, was it, nodded and set the tray down. "She doesn't sleep much these days. There was a pause then. She'd want you to stay the night." Elara glanced back at Marianne's slumped form. "I'd be gone before she wakes." Agnes hesitated. "She talks about you, you know." A bitter laugh nearly escaped her. "Wonders what became of me." "No." The maid's voice was quiet but firm. "She talks about the day you left." The words settled like a weight in Elara's chest. She turned from the window, the robe's oversized sleeves slipping down her arms again. "Then she remembers it differently than I do." Agnes studied her with an expression Elara couldn't quite read, not pity, not judgment, just a kind of quiet understanding. "The guest room's made up at the end of the hall. Stay or don't. But the rain's not done yet." Elara watched her go, then turned back to the window. She could see the faint ghost of her reflection in the glass, sharp features framed by wild, silver-streaked hair, the kind of face that had spent years weathering storms, literal and otherwise. 50 years of carrying that last day like a stone in her pocket. 50 years of imagining what she'd say if she ever saw Marianne again. And now all she had were questions. She wandered back to the fire, stirring the embers just to keep her hands busy. The room was full of portraits, Marianne as a young woman, poised and lovely. Her husband, Thomas, stern-faced in his military garb. Their children, straight-backed and proper. Every frame was polished, every surface spotless. No dust, no mess, no life. "Still awake?" The rasp in Marianne's voice startled her. Elara turned to find her watching through half-lidded eyes. "Old habits," Elara muttered. Marianne struggled to sit straighter, wincing. "Still hate staying still." The robe slipped from one bony shoulder, and Elara instinctively reached to tug it back up. Marianne's skin was warm under her fingers, the bones beneath too prominent. "You're thinner than you used to be," Elara said, withdrawing her hand. "And you're sharper." Marianne coughed, clearing her throat. "I always envied that about you, never needed anyone else to tell you what you were worth." Elara stared at her. "That's not how I remember it." A sigh. "No, I suppose not." Marianne shifted, wincing again. "I lied to you." The words hung between them, heavier than the storm outside. Lara's fingers twitched at her sides. "Which time?" Marianne didn't smile. "The day you left, that letter I sent, I never meant for everyone to see it." Elara's breath caught, but she kept her voice steady. "But you did send it." Marianne met her gaze, unflinching. "I did." The fire spat a spark onto the hearth, and Elara watched it glow bright, then die. For years, she'd imagined this moment, the confrontation, the fury, the reckoning. And now here it was, this quiet, weary confession in the middle of the night. No fight left in either of them, just truth. Elara turned away, her voice thick. "You ruined me. I know, they took my children." "I didn't," Marianne broke off, breath hitching. "I didn't think they would." Elara whirled back. "Then you weren't thinking at all." Marianne didn't flinch. "No, I wasn't." Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Inside, the silence between them was brittle. Elara exhaled slowly, staring at the fire. "Why tonight?" A pause, then barely a whisper. "Because I saw you in the village last week." Elara froze. At the market, Marianne continued. "You were buying bread, talking to the baker, laughing." Her voice softened. "For a minute, you looked like yourself again." Elara swallowed hard. All this time, she'd thought she was the one watching, the one planning, never dreaming that Marianne had seen her too. "You had no right." "No," Marianne agreed. "When Agnes told me you were at the door, I thought this might be my last chance to say it." Elara turned sharply. "Say what?" Marianne held her gaze, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "That I am sorry." The words hung in the air, simple and devastating, All those years of rage, all those plans for revenge, crumbling like old paper in the face of 2 whispered words. Elara's vision blurred. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Too late for that," she muttered. Marianne leaned forward with difficulty, her fingers finding Elara's wrist. "I know." And just like that, the fight drained out of her. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed the hour, 3 deep, mournful tolls. The storm had quieted, but the weight in Elara's chest hadn't lifted. She was still angry, still hurt. And yet, Marianne's grip on her wrist was frail but warm. The firelight caught the silver strands in her hair, the lines around her eyes. 50 years hadn't just changed the village or the gardens or the houses. It had changed them too. Elara looked away. "You should sleep," she said. Marianne exhaled, leaning back into the chair. "The guest room, I'll be here." It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't even peace. But for tonight, it was enough. The fire had burned down to embers by the time Elara stirred. Dawn was creeping through the cracked shutters, casting thin fingers of light across Marianne's sleeping face. She looked older in daylight, fragile, the lines around her mouth deeper than Elara remembered. Not the proud woman who'd stood in the village square all those years ago, handing out invitations to her wedding while rumors about Elara's scandal still burned on every tongue. Elara rubbed her stiff knee and rose from her chair. The floorboards groaned underfoot as she moved to the window, pushing the shutters wider. The storm had washed the world clean. Dew clung to the grass, and the scent of wet earth rose through the morning air. Beyond the garden wall, the village was waking, shutters unlocked, smoke curling from chimneys. Preparations for the festival would already be underway. Behind her, Marianne stirred with a soft gasp. "Elara, I'm here." Marianne pushed herself up gingerly, fingers pressing into the armrest. "I thought—" She stopped, blinking. "I thought I'd dreamed it." Elara didn't answer. In the silence, an old clock ticked, its rhythm steady as a heartbeat. Marianne exhaled. "You're still angry." "Of course I'm angry." Elara turned. "You don't get to apologize once and make it vanish." Marianne's hands tightened in her lap. "I never said it would." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Marianne frowned. "Why did you come to my door last night, after all this time?" Elara could have lied, could have woven some tale about the storm, curiosity, anything but the truth. But the weight of 50 years pressed down on her, and suddenly she was tired of secrets. "I meant to ruin you." Marianne stilled. "At the festival," Elara continued, "I was going to tell them everything about the money your family took, the lies you spread, how I lost my home because of you." A flicker of pain crossed Marianne's face. "And now," Elara hesitated. The vengeance she'd nursed for decades had kept her warm at night, sharper than any fire. But now, staring at the frail woman before her, the words caught in her throat like splinters. The back door creaked open. Both women turned as a figure shuffled in, kicking mud from her boots. A girl, no older than 15, stopped dead at the sight of them. Her dark eyes widened beneath a lopsided wool cap, and the basket of eggs in her arms listed dangerously to one side. "Miss Elara." The girl's voice wavered. I didn't know you had company." Marianne's breath hitched. "Who is this?" Elara didn't take her eyes off the girl. "Agnes, she brings eggs some mornings." Agnes swallowed, gaze darting between them. "Should I come back later?" Marianne leaned forward slightly, studying the girl's face with sudden intensity. "What's your last name, child?" "Thorne." The answer came automatically before Agnes stiffened, realization dawning. Marianne went very still. "Thorne." Elara's knuckles whitened against the window frame. Agnes shifted on her feet, uncomfortable under the scrutiny. "My grandmama told me to drop these off before the festival got busy," she said quickly, setting the basket on the table. She sends her regards." Marianne made a soft noise in the back of her throat. "Your grandmama wouldn't be Cora Thorne, would she?" Agnes hesitated. Then very slowly she nodded. A sharp, cold laugh escaped Marianne. "Of course, how is she?" Elara barely heard the answer. Cora Thorne. The name sent a shiver down her spine. She hadn't thought of Cora in years, Marianne's maid, the girl who'd pressed that damning letter into the magistrate's hands all those years ago. The reason the town had labeled Elara a thief before she could defend herself. And now here was her granddaughter, standing in Elara's kitchen like a ghost from the past. Agnes took a careful step back. "I should go." Marianne opened her mouth as if to stop her, then, just as quickly, closed it. The front door rattled shut behind Agnes a moment later, leaving silence in her wake. Elara finally found her voice. "You knew." Marianne's fingers clenched around the armrests. "I didn't realize Cora still lived in the village. That's not what I meant." Elara's voice was low, dangerous. "You knew she'd take that letter to the magistrate. That's why you gave it to her." Marianne didn't deny it, just met her gaze unflinching. The air between them grew heavy, suffocating. With slow, deliberate steps, Elara crossed the room and plucked a knife from the wooden block by the hearth. Marianne tensed, but Elara only snatched an apple from the counter and began peeling it with trembling hands. The blade caught the morning light, flashing with each furious stroke. "You never just let things happen," Elara whispered. "You always had a plan." Marianne exhaled. "Yes." The final piece of the past slotted into place, jagged and cruel. 50 years, and Elara had never guessed. But seeing Agnes, Cora's blood, standing right there made it impossible to ignore. Marianne hadn't simply slipped up. She'd chosen her weapon carefully. And now Elara had a choice too. The festival bells began to ring in the distance. The reckoning wasn't over. It had only just begun. The knife slid through the apple's flesh once more, sending a curl of peels spiraling to the floor. Elara clenched her jaw so tightly her teeth ached. The distant bells from the festival square sounded too bright, too cheerful, clashing with the storm inside her chest. Marianne hadn't moved. She watched Elara with those sharp eyes, still so calculated even now. "You must understand," she began, voice smooth as creek stones. "Things were different then. You were reckless. You didn't think." The knife thunked into the cutting board. "I didn't think you'd betray me." The words hung between them, heavy as a noose. Outside, the wind rattled the eaves of the old house, and for a heartbeat neither spoke. Marianne sighed, rubbing at her temple. "Elara, what do you want me to say? Yes, I gave the letter to Cora. Yes, I knew she'd take it to the magistrate, but I never imagined they'd." "You mean you never imagined they'd believe it?" Elara's laugh tasted bitter. "Because that's what you always counted on, isn't it? That people would believe whatever Marianne Weatherby said, would trust what she said." The accusation hit home. Marianne flinched as if struck, her carefully composed mask slipping just enough for Elara to catch the flicker underneath. A glint of shame, maybe, or something darker. Guilt, perhaps, or fear. A sharp rap at the door shattered the silence. Both women turned. Elara exhaled through her nose, fingers flexing around the knife's handle. "Stay here." She didn't wait for Marianne's reply. Crossing the creaking floorboards, she yanked the door open and blinked against the brittle afternoon light. It was the old priest, Father Yates, his robes flecked with mud from the road, his ruddy face pinched with concern. "Elara," he began, "forgive the intrusion, but I—" His gaze flickered past her shoulder, landing on Marianne, and his bushy eyebrows shot up. "Oh, you have a guest." Elara didn't bother nodding. "What do you need, Father?" Yates fumbled for words, looking suddenly uncomfortable. "Bishop Wilkins has arrived for the festival. He's asking after you." Her stomach clenched. "Wilkins is here? Why?" The priest lowered his voice. "He says he has something to discuss about Corinth House." Elara went very still. Corinth House, the old orphanage on the North Road, the place the village had sent her children to after the scandal, the place she hadn't been allowed to follow. A floorboard creaked behind her. Marianne had risen from her chair, her cane tapping ever so softly as she stepped closer. Yates's expression turned wary. "Perhaps this isn't the best time." "No," Elara said sharply. "No, it's fine." Marianne's hand settled lightly on her arm, warm as a brand. "Elara," that quiet voice so infuriatingly calm. "Don't." But she was already grabbing her shawl from the hook. Wilkins could wait. Because suddenly, Elara knew exactly where she needed to go. The festival had swallowed the village square whole. Streamers fluttered between the rooftops, and laughter spilled from the makeshift stalls selling candied nuts and spiced cider. Children darted between legs, shrieking. Elara barely noticed any of it. She moved like a shadow through the crowd, her pulse loud in her ears. Agnes, Cora's Agnes. She spotted the girl near the well, helping an older woman, bent-backed, gray-haired, set out jars of preserves on a cloth-covered table. Cora, 50 years had carved deep lines into her face, turned her once dark hair to silver. but Elara would have recognized that sharp nose anywhere. The past rushed up at her like a wave. Her fingers curled into fists. Then movement behind Cora, a man in fine city clothes stepped into view, adjusting his cuffs. Bishop Wilkins. Her breath caught. Wilkins was speaking quietly with a woman in a blue dress, another stranger, another face Elara didn't know. But then the woman turned slightly and Elara froze. That profile, that chin, that way of tucking her hair behind her ear. Elara's vision swam. No, impossible. Yet there she was, her daughter. She hadn't seen Clara in 42 years, not since the magistrate tore them apart, since they told her a woman branded a thief couldn't raise a daughter of good standing. Now, Clara stood there, laughing softly at something Wilkins said, looking so much like her father it hurt. Elara swayed. She'd planned this moment 1,000 times in her head. The confrontation with Marianne, the reckoning with Cora, every step meticulous, every detail accounted for. But this, she hadn't planned for this. And as if sensing the weight of her stare, Clara looked up. Their eyes met. Elara didn't breathe. Clara's mouth parted first in confusion, then recognition. Then something else entirely, something like fear. Wilkins followed her gaze. His face darkened. Elara took a step back, and then another. This changed everything. And Marianne had known, hadn't she? Elara spun on her heel, pushing blindly through the crowd, heart hammering. She had to get back. A hand grabbed her wrist. She whipped around, the old rage surging back, and found Agnes staring up at her, dark eyes wide with concern. "Miss Elara!" The girl's voice was barely a whisper. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Elara swallowed hard. She had.